For almost 2 weeks, the Donner Reed party had been carving a trail through East Canyon, which is behind Big Mountain. And they finally came out at the Big Mountain summit, which is at the top of this picture. Then they proceeded to go down the ridge of the mountain to the right, down into Dell Canyon, which led them down into a small grassy mountain meadow, which now lies underneath the Little Dell Reservoir. From there they crossed over and went up and over Little Mountain Summit into Immigration Canyon. The trail at Little Mountain Summit is still visible now because for years that same trail was used as the main entrance into Salt Lake City. This is the mouth of Immigration Canyon, and Donner Hill is right there. That's the canyon narrows that they were having a hard time breaking through. You've got about a quarter of a mile of heavy brush that they would have had to have hacked their way through, and so instead they just went up this hill right about the center of where we're pointing, and they went out onto the flat and dropped down into the Salt Lake Valley. In the center of the Salt Lake Valley, they came across a river that exited Utah Lake to the south and emptied into the Great Salt Lake to the north. This river is now called the Jordan River. And they found an area that they felt that they could cross at, which is roughly about 1,000 west and 2,800 south in an industrial warehouse area of Salt Lake. And from there they entered into what they called a swampy area, which could only describe what is now called the Decker Lake area in West Valley City. They proceeded to go around the north tip of the Ochre Mountains, which is shown in the background here. That would be swinging out to the right of that mountain range and along the south shores of the Great Salt Lake. We're in the Immigrant Park in Lake Point, Utah, which is, you just came out of the Salt Lake Valley and entered the Tooele Valley, and there's this wilderness park right here that's under threat of urban development, but it has a significant point to it. It's preserved currently by the California Trails and the BLM, but you can kind of see there's housing all around. But right up ahead here we have where the Donner Party crossed through. You can still see part of the trail. California Trail marker. And if you can see in here, There's a bit of a swale right in the center of this coming straight to us. And that's where the Donner Party wagons came across, right there. And you can also see that it's preserved by a pipe fence. But still, there's getting trash. There's some old tires and whatnot over there. They're building houses as fast as they can around this.
Shortly after they left the Grayback Mountains and the dunes and hit the actual flats, they started jettisoning stuff because it started getting pretty dicey. And there was a place they referred to as the Bird's Nest out there. They found some stuff there, and even a couple of abandoned wagons had been stripped out. And then there was at least 5 in the mud flats. And it's believed by us and Charles Kelly and others that that Palace car was one of the ones they left there. Now, I've had some discussions with people that say, no, it went on to Nevada. That Virginia Reed in her book said that they abandoned the family wagon after they got into what became Nevada. However, if you read her book, she says that their family wagon was pulled out of the desert with an ox and a milk cow. I don't see how an ox and a milk cow pulled that wagon out of anywhere. And when they excavated them, that was believed to be the Palace car, because this is a hub from a standard light wagon from the Donner Party. That hub's a whole lot bigger. And this axle end that's sitting here, they couldn't bring the whole axle in, so they cut the end off, but you can see by its size and design, it's extra heavy. And it was held, the wheel would be held on with a pin or a dog. They hadn't used axle nuts yet. Another thing a lot of people didn't know, their oxen were shod. And they found these oxen shoes at the site where the oxen wearing them probably died. And also, whoever was in this wagon was dining on fine china. The average immigrant was lucky to have a tin plate. And then they found this along the way too. Any of you ladies ever done any food canning? Preservation. That's natural amber. And if you were wealthy in the 1840s, you could take prepared food and put it in an earthen container, put a wooden lid on it, heat that little crucible with amber in it, and it would melt, and they would pour that around the lid to seal it, because they hadn't invented paraffin wax or rubber seals yet. And that's something that primarily only wealthy people would have. When you break something open, you would save the amber, because it was valuable and it could be reused. And I think you could, we can pass that around, anyone else would like to see it. And you could heat that up today and it would melt and could be reused. The little barrel back there would be your personal drinking water. Most wagons would have 2 barrels of water on them.
How many?
2, which are generally enough for 2 days' travel. And they tried to carry enough fodder for 2 days.
Not 2 of those, right?
No, 2 big barrels.
Yeah.
And that would be your drinking water, would be in the smaller barrel. Try and keep it a little better. Let's see, the amber, we can pass it around too.
It's around here.
It's there somewhere.
Again, when was all this found? What years?
This would be in the 1920s.
Okay.
There was Charles Kelly, was an associate professor at the University of Utah, was in charge. There was some guys from Grantsville and Skull Valley that knew the country. The Orr brothers and the Durfee brothers from Grantsville. The Durfee brothers I knew fairly well, at least one of them. They knew the country because in the 1870s, they would go up to Kelton on the Transcontinental Railway and pick up a herd of livestock, sheep or cows, and drive them down the west side of the Newfoundlands. There's an area on the south end they called the tanks, where there was natural pockets in the rock. And in the springtime especially, they could contain enough water to water livestock as you're on your way. And then they'd come on across and down the Cedar Mountains and clear down into Delta and sometimes clear to central Utah with these herds of cattle. And they knew that country, and they had seen the wagons out there, knew where they were. So Kelly had them guide them out to them.
Was that the same Charles Kelly that wrote the book, The Outlaw Trail?
Probably. He wrote some trails. He was, I'm trying to think, he wrote 2 books about this. He was also superintendent for the Park Service in, I believe, Zions and some of the southern parks. And he wrote some books. He was quite a prolific writer. From a light wagon. And this is a hub ring from a wagon, and you can date it to the period because it has a notch cut in it. By the 1850s, primarily your wagon wheels would have an axle nut, and they wouldn't have to cut that notch. That notch was there so you could drive the pin out. And that's one of the ways they date axle hubs. And then this is some of the wood parts they brought in, and metal pieces. A lot of them are part of the harnesses and the yokes for the animals. Now the ox yoke behind us here was found close to Silver Island. Likely Donner Party, but they're really not sure. But look at the wear in that ring. An animal had to pull on that a whole bunch to wear that much. And then there's this case here has what's left of 2 rifles. And then a small, and our lighting's not very good in here, but it's period. The building's an artifact. And that's a utility knife, probably greener. And then you can see there's some tools, a pick and an axe head and things here. And then they brought in a bunch of just nudgels that were so corroded that there's not much left. They did take some x-rays of some of them back in the day and to see if they could identify what was in them. And to some extent they could a little bit, but not a great deal.
Was this the school?
This was built as a schoolhouse.
Okay.
It's considered the oldest continuously used adobe structure in the territory. And has quite a history. But my favorite story is the little table behind you. According to their writings, the last expedition was 1929, and they drove a Model A out. There was 4 guys in it. They found one of the wagons and did the full archaeological write-up. And when they went to leave, the Model A was stuck. They said as regrettable as it was, they had to tear the wagon apart and use the planks from the wagon to get the Model A out. And the story is they put some of the planks on the roof and lashed them down in case they got stuck again. And one of the Durfees from Grantsville took those planks and made furniture. The top of that table is probably the floor of a Donner wagon from that party. And it's old growth oak, and you can see how heavy it is. And then they would take, go out in the desert and pull up a juniper tree or cedar tree and use the roots for furniture.
Okay.
And that's what that table is.
We are traveling on Interstate 80 between Salt Lake City and Wendover. We're heading westbound. We're in Tooele County, Utah. To the right of me, I have the south shores of the Great Salt Lake. To the left of me, I have the town of Grantsville out here. And somewhere along this area was the first death in the Donner Party. It was a young merchant named Luke Halloran who had consumption. He died peacefully in the afternoon of August 27th, 1846. And he's buried out here somewhere. Grave is totally unknown. We are at a location called Horseshoe Springs in Skull Valley. We have the Hastings Cutoff. Management sign here. But if you look out here, you can see the wagon tracks right here, carved in dirt. We'll walk over here to the left, take a look at Horseshoe Springs. This is Horseshoe Springs in Skull Valley. This looks like an irrigation canal right here.
Yeah.
And it's got stepping stones, which I'm not about to cross over.
You're not?
But the springs are right down there.
It's beautiful.
And circles off to the left here. And disappears right out there by that point. Okay, we're at a point called Rock Bottom. I don't know, I believe that's a modern name. But as you can see, there are some springs here down below us. We're on kind of a rock edge here, a rock point. We've got some more springs down there. If we pan over here, and right at the bottom of the hill, there's a marker down there marking where the Donner Party came through. And it's not that dirt road right there. It's in between that dirt road and where I am. There's a bit of a swale right out here. And that's where the Donner Party came. They came through that swale. We have this marker here that's been all shot up, vandalized. But the trail is right through here. You can kind of see the swale where the trail goes off through here. We are below rock bottom, or the point of rocks that I was just filming from. Where my wife is over there, there's a few little Indian carvings I can show you. And then the trail goes off down this way. Why did they go out and around in Skull Valley? That's because out here, where you're looking, you had high water from the Great Salt Lake that protruded all the way down through here. And that's why they had to swing out south to go out around. And then they went through Hastings Pass, which is going to be right over there, straight ahead. And that's where we're heading. Okay, we're back up on top. See this rock art right here? Indian rock art. There's a couple of them on these rocks right here. There's the Hastings Trail, or the Donner Trail, right down below. I doubt that the Donner Party and the wagon trains knew about this rock art. In the 1840s, the California Trail separated from the Oregon Trail west of South Pass, Wyoming. The California Trail went down southwest to Fort Bridger and then up northwest to Fort Hall near Pocatello, Idaho. Then it turned down again southwest to near Winnemucca, Nevada. It did this to go around the Great Salt Lake and the Salt Flats in northern Utah. In 1845, Lansford Hastings was trying to draw more Americans to go to California and increase the American to Mexican ratio, because in 1845, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico were all part of Mexico. So when explorer John C. Fremont reported that he had traveled to California by going south of the Great Salt Lake, Hastings quickly wrote in his travel guidebook that there was a more direct route from Fort Bridger to Winnemucca. This route would become known as the Hastings Cutoff. However, Hastings had never traveled that route, and there were three major hurdles in the cutoff. There weren't wagon routes over the Wasatch Mountain Range, the Salt Flats, both in Utah, or over the Ruby Mountains in Nevada. There were three parties that had tried the new cutoff ahead of the Donner Party, and the first hurdle they encountered was the mouth of Weber Canyon as it broke out on the west side of the Wasatch Mountains. The mouth of the canyon was very narrow with rock cliffs on both sides and the treacherous Weber River. It was near impossible to float wagons down, and in places tripods were built to swing wagons over the gorge. The Donner Party had started late across the plains, and they were a couple weeks behind the other wagons on Hastings Cutoff. But to avoid the mouth of Weaver Canyon, they turned southwest out of Echo Canyon and headed over the Wasatch Mountains from what is now East Canyon, Dell, and Immigration Canyons. They had to cut their own trail through the trees, which put them another couple weeks behind. All wagon trails connected near Lake Point, Utah, but the next obstacle was the Salt Flats west of the Great Salt Lake. Hastings had reported that this section was no more than 40 miles long and could be traveled in 2 days. That was wrong. It was more than double the distance, and the crossing took more than a week. The Salt Flats have a hard crust on top covering a bottomless muck underneath. When you broke through, it was like trying to drag a wagon through wet cement for 80 miles. All these hurdles of the cutoff delayed the Donner Party, and they were dangerously late when they reconnected with the California Trail in central Nevada. The question is, was Hastings just ignorant of the hazards, or had he purposely understated them? So here we are out on the west side of Skull Valley. These are the Cedar Mountain Range. Coming down the road, and right here we have the wagon tracks. This is part of the Donner Trail right here, or the Hastings Cutoff Trail. As you can see by these carcinite markers, we're actually walking on the Hastings Cutoff. We'll go around and take another look here. Hastings Cutoff. Let's walk out here a little bit further on this trail. We did see a wild horse about 10 minutes ago running across the flat. There's quite a wild horse herd out here in the Skull Valley area. Yeah, you can see the definite tracks. Oh, there goes the lizard. So it looks like they came up through that draw and came out onto these flats on the western slope. Pretty desolate country. As we drive across Skull Valley, we ponder, how did it get its name? Well, there are several theories on the subject, but my favorite is, if you had an area with limited freshwater springs and limited grass, and you were a Native American tribe, you didn't want somebody else using your resources. You wanted to preserve them. So therefore, Native American tribes would take animal bones and skulls and put them around the springs. Therefore, any wandering bands would come through there and assume that the water was bad. All right, we're on the summit of Hastings Pass. they crossed over here around the 1st of September, which is about, well, yeah, it's 179 years to the day of when they crossed over the pass here. This is where the trail comes up. You can see where they came up through that drainage. You can see Skull Valley out there in the bottom, and the Stansbury Mountains out in the distance. They had to skirt around. Most of that down in Skull Valley would have been underwater. I don't know how many feet of water, but it would have been underwater from the Great Salt Lake because the water levels were higher. That's why they had to go around through Skull Valley. So far, they had to make that big jog, that dog leg, I guess you could say, to go out and around the Great Salt Lake, which would have taken them over to the right, and then back up along these foothills, come up over this draw, come up this trail. Now, I don't know if they would have gone down this ridge or if they would have gone down that drainage. I'm not sure at this point, but they head down over the Cedar Mountains here, and then off in the distance we're gonna have Pilot Peak, and we'll show another video of Pilot Peak when we get down out of this pass. It's quite daunting when you see it from this distance. Okay, so where we are, there's the trail right there. They came out down this way off of the Cedar Mountain range, and this is where they would have glimpsed what they needed to do. Pilot Peak is directly center. It's that second range out there. Pilot's Peak is directly north of Wendover, Nevada. And the only way they could get to Pilot's Peak, that's the landmark they were told to aim for. The only way they could get there was to go out across to the right, around those hills, and then back over. That's 80 miles that they had to travel through there, and the last water they got was back in Skull Valley, and that would have been 3 or 4 days ago. So whatever water they had left had to carry them all the way to Pilot Peak. They did find a spring on the way out there, but the water was brackish, but they still used it.